I'm very pleased to welcome Miguel Meza on Rain or Shine today. It's our second take, and I'm very pleased that today everything works. It's not only because it proves how global this platform can be, it's very difficult to be further apart than we are today, because Miguel is talking to us from Hawaii and Big Island, if I'm not
We are
wrong.
we are 12 time zones away. We are completely opposite.
Completely opposite. So it's a technological feat, and let's not forget about it. And it's pretty great that we can do it. But I'm also very pleased because Miguel has a very inspiring career in coffee, and he's been involved in coffee from an early age, probably an age where I was mostly interested in kicking balls on a field, but he was doing other stuff for sure. And he took years and years ahead of everybody, I suppose, in the coffee industry, people from his age. And so here on Rain or Shine, we love people who can inspire. So I'm happy to have you here, Miguel. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So can you tell us a little bit who you are? And I was talking about your early age of starting with coffee. Um, how did that happen? How were you when you started in like thinking about coffee?
Really taking a strong interest in it about 13.
Yeah, very young.
Yeah, so I was very interested in coffee, why coffees taste different, all these different places coffee has grown. And once I was old enough, 16 in the US, to be able to apply for work at a coffee shop, then I went to the local coffee shop and turned in an application every week until they finally gave me a job. And I've been pretty much in the industry since then.
So they give up and they give you a spot, and then they saw like how committed you were and how and where you wanted to go with coffee.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, this was a long, long time ago. I assume that going to a coffee shop is where you would go to learn more about coffee, and these people would be connoisseurs and know a lot more. But that's not really the case, or certainly wasn't the case back then.
Mm.
So I
So how
had to
did you
look
get?
at books and whatnot that was available at that time, and just
But that was you first experienced coffee in Seattle. So in Seattle, that's like one of the main spots, right? Where you
my first experience with espresso was in Seattle. Yeah, and this was in
okay.
the mid '90s when espresso culture was where Seattle was kind of the capital of the world of espresso culture at that time, or in the U.S. anyway. Um, and that was just starting to grow in my area, in the Minneapolis area where I was living at the time. But yeah, that's a long time ago.
Hmm. So and you were early in the coffee, but also early as a in the business of coffee. You started a company quite a young age as well.
Yeah, yeah. So my family started a roasting company in 2002. I was 19 at the time, and did the roasting, the green buying, packaging, pretty much everything from the start.
Nice, but and you do have a lot of hats, as I would say. So you're a roaster, you're a green brewer. You've done a lot in competitions as well as coach and competitor. You're a consultant. You consult on farms or for roasting as well, or
Yep.
different coffee businesses across the world as well, not just in Minneapolis or in Hawaii where you live now.
Yeah, yeah, all over the world.
Or,
Yeah, so I mean, I have two businesses now. I have Paradise Coffee Roasters, my roasting company, which is still the same company that I started with almost 20 years ago. And then I have an export company for green coffee, primarily from Hawaii, Isla Custom Coffees, that I've been operating for almost a decade now.
Okay. So what has been the when you were studying with your family, the roastery in Minneapolis, like how did you see your career at this young age? And like how what was the main objective for you in coffee? You just wanted to learn everything that had to be learned on coffee?
Yeah, to some extent, I wanted to taste coffee and travel the world and understand why coffee tastes the way it does and how I can manipulate it, how I can make it better, just make the best coffee that I possibly can, bar none.
Hmm.
And at some point, I didn't think I could really get any further with that, just with roasting, I felt that quality for coffee really starts at the farm level. And so in 2008, I moved to Hawaii to work with coffee at the source.
Because that was easy to relocate in an American state, or why did you choose Hawaii?
Yeah, I mean, one, it was easy to do, and I was just able to come across an opportunity. Somebody offered me a job and a place to stay on their farm, so I took that opportunity.
Okay, so did you arrive during the harvest time, or like
It was beginning of the harvest time, yeah.
Do you remember your first experience of the coffee land?
Yeah, I mean, as soon as I put my bags down inside the house, the first thing I went and did was I went into the field and I harvested some cherries, and I set up some processing experiments to show the owner. I laid out on a glass table, I dried some cherries as natural, and I hand pulped some coffees to make a honey at that time, and used those to eventually convince the farm owner to produce some of the first coffees in these styles in Kona a couple months later.
Can you tell us a little bit more about Hawaiian coffee? I mean, in France, we some roasters do have Kona coffee, and it happens also that we get roasted coffee from Hawaii, but we don't know much about the specificities of coffee farms in Hawaii. Can you tell us a little bit the average size or the varietals that we generally see in Hawaii?
Yes, I mean we're a strange place. The most common variety in Hawaii is Typica because we're the only place in the world that doesn't have leaf rust. So we don't have at current a concern about that. In most places where you have leaf rust, growing Typica, especially at low elevations, is close to impossible. We're quite far north for a coffee growing region. We're 19 to 21 degrees north, depending on what island you're on. And so our growing elevations are relatively low compared to places that are closer to the equator, anywhere from sea level up to about 1,000 meters. I'm not aware of any coffee growing higher than that.
Okay. Is there like is there some kind of island effect as well, where that allows Arabica to be cultivated at lower altitude?
Well, I mean, the thing that you have to understand is that altitude doesn't matter. Environmental growing temps matter. So our temperatures, even at sea level in some areas of the island on the cloudier sides, are comparable to what would be 1,000 meters in Central America. 1,000, 1,200 meters. When you get to 600, 700 meters in a lot of our island, you're talking, elevations that are comparable to, or temperatures that are comparable to some 1,600 meters plus in a lot of the more common coffee growing regions.
So that's why you don't have to be scared when you see a coffee bag from Hawaii and you see 600 meters. It doesn't matter.
600 meters is quite high elevation for Hawaii.
Exactly. So it's don't judge the coffee from the altitude.
Yeah, and that's with any coffee growing region. Altitude is only a useful metric in comparison to other coffees from that same country or region. You can't really compare, 1,500 meters from Panama to Kenya, Colombia to Brazil. They're not the same.
Mm-hmm. So mostly Typica and probably like sort of a smaller range of size for the plantations, the farms, in terms of surface.
There's a big range of size. So on my island, on the big island of Hawaii, there is about 900 small farms or farms of varying sizes. The other islands have very large mechanical harvested farms, like Brazilian style, that are usually, around 100 hectares. There's one on Kauai Island that is 1,500 hectares. It's a giant. It was at one time the largest coffee farm in the world. But like in the Kona region, which is the most famous Hawaiian region, your average farm size is about 1 hectare.
Okay, all right.
And then you have other areas where in the Kau in the south, it's a little bit bigger than that. 2 or 3 hectares would be common. And then larger than that there are some, but it's very few. Okay. There are some up to maybe 50 to 100 hectares at the largest, but that's only 2 or 3 people.
And in terms of people, actually, like how do you find the pickers? Like how is it organized?
So that's a challenge on an island. Most of the pickers are come from California.
Okay.
But they're seasonal laborers, mostly from Mexico and Latin America. They a lot of them work in the wine industry, picking grapes in part of the season, and then they travel to Hawaii to pick coffee during the harvest season here. Um, but yeah, that's mostly for the Kona region. Other regions of the island that are kind of more smaller, scattered farms, they tend to just try and find whoever they can hire locally, which is always a challenge. And a lot of times the coffee just doesn't all get picked because there isn't enough labor to go around.
Wow. Okay. And do you find coffee on several islands then other than Big Island?
Yeah. There's coffee on Hawaii Island, on Maui, on Kauai, on Oahu, and there's somebody planting some coffee on the island of Lanai right now. So yeah, several islands. Oh,
Yeah.
Molokai also. So most of the islands have coffee.
Okay. Very cool. I didn't know that. So you as we said you have very different hats, and you became first a roaster and also a green brewer, and then you were interested in the production. How do these different jobs, do you still do a little bit of all these different jobs, and how do you manage your time in between these different occupations and also your consultant? So like what is your today, what is your main job?
Well, it varies day to day. I have to kind of just juggle different things. Today, I'm cupping some processing experiments after this call. I'll probably have to roast some samples later. Take care of emails for my roasting business, set up product pages. I also manage a lot of things. Where my roasting company is small, so I wear a lot of hats there too. And probably send out some emails to try and offer some green coffee for my other business, and follow up on some other farm projects that I manage as well. I've got people throwing fertilizer on a farm I manage in Kona right now, so I have to check in on them later. So it's a lot of different little things, and it's different every day.
Different every day, you don't get bored?
No, that's not a problem.
Good. So you were mentioning that you were going to cup experiments, and
Mm-hmm.
I believe I understand that that's what drives you in coffee. Also, is to try to experiment a lot, and to always maybe improve what you already know, and through trials and error, which is something I'm very familiar with. And that's also the way I do things in general. It's the best way to learn and improve, as for me. But like, how was it an early also something you learn at an early age?
I mean, I would say my entire coffee career has kind of been that way. There weren't really any sources for learning about coffee, 20 years ago. Especially, the practicalities of things like, roasting, sourcing green coffees. That you just had to learn these by experience. You couldn't acquire that knowledge anywhere else. And even when you kind of can read about it here, you still don't really understand it without that breadth of experience with these things. And so, I mean, just learning to roast is just try one thing, try another. Anything I'm doing, I'm always going to try and probably make 3 variations on it. Just take one variable and let's do what we're doing here, and let's go, a little bit this way and a little bit that way, and then cup and compare, and then see if there's any trends, then repeat and just keep moving in different directions. Read what's out there about, what research might, indicate some potential avenues to explore, and then just test and test and test again. And a lot of
Do
stuff is
you
dead ends.
exactly, like, how do you try to keep up to date with the last years? There's been a lot of new things, new ways to roast, or to see roasting, I suppose, but also new equipment, but not just in roasting, but in all the different aspects of coffee. And so you've been here for 20 years and always with a fresh mind. So how do you see the evolution in the way we think about coffee and we work with coffee today compared to what it was 20 years ago? And do you try to keep yourself up to date?
Much less so with roasting or brewing advances. I'm really much more focused on the coffee production side. So, in terms of, papers, things relating to coffee fermentation, to, coffee varietal development, that kind of stuff, I follow whatever the latest paper is. I'm always trying to get my hands on it and see what's being done. I travel to a lot of international trade shows, or I did prior to COVID-19. So, I kind of see what's going on. We're pretty connected with the internet these days to, kind of share information quickly. So I usually hear of what's going on in different parts of the world or what trends are. And I always follow them with a little bit of skepticism. Lots of things are new, or they work very well in specific applications, but there's very few things that are, honestly, across the board advances.
It's interesting to see your point of view because you've touched so many different aspects of coffee, and sometimes after a long conversation about new technologies and new ways to think about different aspects of coffee, there's sort of a conclusion that actually everything was pretty well done before or already. It's just the tools we have are pretty new now. But
yeah, I think experimentation is important and doing new things are important. I think there's a lot of times because it is business and it is industry, a rush to a conclusion to market that you've developed something that is better. And we always say that this tastes better in quality, but we don't do a very good job about. Nothing is really completely better. There's almost always a sacrifice somewhere. So I think we probably need to shift to more of kind of a sensory science and kind of describing how it's different, or that may be better, that may be what you're looking for, but maybe it's not. Maybe you're losing something that you don't want to lose, or maybe what you're gaining is something that for your application you don't really care about.
Mm-hmm. So you say like sensory, your sensory skills are pretty the centerpiece into all that, because if you can't cup, then you can't evaluate what you're doing at the different levels. So it's been already like at a very early age as well, the necessity to be able to cup well.
Yeah, I've always loved tasting things. I've always loved food and just trying anything and everything I can, and just sensory experiences in general since I was as long as I can remember.
So, like, is it something that you also put in the center of your trainings, or the people that consult you, or the people that you coach? How do you teach sensory skills? Because it's really the centerpiece of quality improvement. So, like, how can you teach people?
I think it's one of those things that's, in some ways, I don't think there's really shortcuts. There's only time and experience, and just to taste as many things, and intentionally good and bad, and as varied in breadth as you can. And then not only with coffee, or with everything, and pay attention to what you're tasting. Just pay attention. What does an orange really smell like or taste like? What does a clove? Just focusing on the details of any kind of food or beverage kind of experience, and that translates to being able to recognize those things better in coffee or wine or whatever it is that you're exploring.
But have you so you've done a lot of competitions, is that and I think cupping competitions as well, is that something that is a good way to train and be involved in as well, to learn, and like what is how do you see competitions in your career and your
I've judged a dozen or more cupping competitions over the last decade. I do think that is probably a good way to increase your experience. You're probably going to taste a lot of things, good and bad, or just very unique and interesting, and also get exposed to a lot that really isn't that different. That's a lot of things are quite similar and harder to pick apart than you might expect. But yeah, it is. You're tasting a lot of coffees in a very short period of time. I mean, you could 200, 300 cups a day, quite often, and I think that's a great experience. for anybody that really wants to learn cupping, I think doing it in a producing place is much more valuable. I don't care how long you've been cupping at a roaster in the US or the States. If you've been doing that for 2 years, 3 years, you've probably only been exposed to a range of coffees within the good spectrum, most likely. The worst stuff or maybe unusual things have been filtered out by the importers or roasters, because that's their job, is to make sure that you're not purchasing something that's kind of lower quality, versus when you are on the export side, or working with especially small farmers, you see a much bigger range of quality. And I see quite a lot of times when we get into processing and fermentation, people in the specialty coffee industry getting very excited about flavors that they haven't experienced before, which are really, if you'd been experienced a lot of coffee defects, you'd recognize these. And that these smells that you're getting excited about are indications that there might be something to be concerned about.
Mm-hmm. Something that is not clean, for sure. And the first, as you said, the first time you encounter them, you may be excited about it, and
because what is that? I've never seen that before, and it might seem extremely fruity, and you're excited about it, and because of your excitement, you tend to lose focus of the other aspects of the cup that may be less positive.
Mm-hmm. So when you were before you arrived in Hawaii, as you said, you were just probably in front of coffees that have been filtered out by the importers. But it's really when you arrived in Hawaii and you got to taste all your experiments that you also got to understand and recognize the defects. Because again, like in quality, you have to be able to evaluate the good ones, but also find the bad ones.
Yeah, and I mean, I had traveled to some other countries before, and I had judged a cupping competition in Ethiopia in 2006, and that was like a week-long competition at a kind of government area where they were, cupping the coffees, and had hundreds of coffees. And so that was a great opportunity to, learn from the local cuppers. And if something, tastes strange, good or bad, just ask, what is this? The people that deal with this every day, they know right away what that taste is and what it comes from and what causes it. And you can't really get that without, a lot of experience with, I think, similar coffees to recognize and pick up what's going on in a coffee. When I'm tasting things, I'm usually less concerned with kind of the sensory description and more with, what are the things in the cup telling me about, I guess, kind of the journey this coffee's been through, and good or bad things or potential for the coffee.
So when you have a new coffee in front of you, what do you think about? Like, what are the attributes that are really important for you, if not the notes and the aromatics or the flavors?
I think I pay more attention to the structure of a coffee more so than flavor than most people seem to do. Just because something can have a muddy flavor, a dirty flavor, or, just a general lack of flavor, vegetal flavor, but you can kind of see its potential behind that. If you can kind of see, okay, there's a nice weight, there's a nice viscosity to this, there's nice acidity. If it's bitter or astringent, that's usually a cherry harvesting problem. It's unripe, most likely, or has some Quakers in it, something, so being able to kind of see past those things and just, see that, okay, there's good intensity here, but the product needs refining. Or, conversely, seeing something that may be really explosively flavorful and say, but this is thin, this is bitter, this is drying, or maybe it's, sour, pulpy, it's fruity, but there's some problems in the fruit removal. So looking at those kind of things versus just describing something as raspberry, blueberry, caramel.
Yeah. So when you arrived in Hawaii, how was the quality of the beans and the coffee you cupped? Were you able to say like, okay, this is good coffee and bad coffee, or you learned to see that things could be really improved with the Hawaiian coffee?
There was a lot of bad coffee. There still is a lot of bad coffee, or at least average, mediocre coffee. But yeah, I could see, and I did believe that things could be improved. And working with some farms and just doing things as simple as ripe cherry selection. Ripe cherry harvest doesn't happen commonly in Hawaii. Because of the cost of labor here. It's hugely expensive to pick coffee, so pickers are incentivized to pick faster, and people don't really want to pay more and increase their cost of production. So you have what's basically strip pick coffee is the norm. I think the mechanical harvested farms in some cases might actually yield a slightly better or comparable product than the hand harvested. And then they have sorting technologies connected to those mills that small farms here don't tend to have. So the average quality, because of the cherry selection, can be, not that exciting. But obviously you start cleaning some of those things up, and then, the coffees have potential. And I have brought these, to work with competitors in world level where they have placed in the finals. Second place in World Barista Competition, third place in Brewers Cup. So, when you find the right varieties and you treat them great, then there's potential here, and there's potential really in any coffee growing region.
And coffee competitions, but also coffee review, right? Which is a website that reviews coffee, and you had about 20 coffees that were scored higher than 95, which sounds crazy.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that number is exactly right now. I believe it's more than 100 that are 94 plus over the last 15 years.
Yeah, so it's a big feat as well. So like, how would you explain that? So many of these coffees scored so high from after all an origin that we don't know that well.
They're good coffees. I mean, it's that simple. You roast good coffee and you roast it well, and you'll have good results. There isn't anything inferior about this origin or most origins. It's just working with the farms at the at the cherry level, at the varietal selection. So selecting varieties or finding the varieties that work best in those places, and finding the farm locations that have the most potential, and then working with those coffees. Unsurprisingly, a lot of these best coffees are significantly higher altitude than the average that is grown here. These are, our average coffees are 200 to 400 meters, and pretty much all of the best ones are, 600 meters plus.
So when you started to work with coffee farms in Hawaii, what were the different steps to take to improve quality along the years? So you said like you choose different varietals than the Typica to try to adapt yourself to a more local terroirs, I suppose. What are the different steps that you took?
One is improving cherry selection. So let's get fully ripe cherry, and that required hand sorting after the harvest. And with the farms I work with, also, just training a new picking staff that are the same people you work with all the time, and these people kind of know what you want, and then still doing some sorting after the harvest to ensure that you have ripe cherry selection. Focusing on the processing, fruit removal, drying stage, and then with some of the farms, at starting at new farms, is selecting varieties that had high cup potential. Typica is the most grown variety here, and farmers are very reticent to change from it. But and it is, an heirloom variety that I think people kind of sometimes get excited about. But honestly, almost everything outcups it on a table. It's a very nice, balanced cup, but it is not particularly distinctive or intense.
Mm.
So like with one of the farms I work with, Hula Daddy, the first thing that we did is plant a new farm. Let's try some new varieties. We try SL28, Mocha, Larina, Bourbon, and all of these cup better than the Typica on the same farm.
Okay, that's a good point. Actually, I was wondering whether I thought the Typica actually was a varietal that we don't see that much anymore because it's fragile, but I thought we were missing it because I don't know because it's heirloom and because it's the original one. But it's good information to see like it doesn't.
Yeah, it's good to preserve it, I guess, and understand what it is. But in almost every farm I've tasted from anywhere in the world, if you have Typica and Bourbon on the same farm, Bourbon almost always cups better at any altitude, any region I've ever tasted. And most Bourbon-derived varieties tend to cup a little bit better. It's a balanced coffee at high elevation. It does have nice, it can have kind of floral, citrusy attributes, and it can be a sweet variety. But you plant Bourbon next to it on the same plot or other varieties, and they will be better. And they will and they'll be more productive as well. It's not a very high yielding variety, and it's a very disease susceptible variety.
Yeah. So you mentioned that you today you're going to check out the farmers after fertilization. You follow.
I've got to call them and see where they're at and how many more days they're going to see. And yeah, later this week, then I will go check out the progress at the farm on Friday.
But that's also something that you follow up. So it's not only about harvest, but it's also all year round, and so quality also builds up from the development of the plant and the fruit so how has it changed in the last years and especially in Hawaii?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Yeah, how is it handled in Hawaii, just the managing of the farm outside of the harvest season, and has it been something to focus on to improve quality as well?
Well, how farms are handled varies a lot farm to farm, and depending on the resources and tools that they have available to them. Everything we do in Hawaii is pretty different than most other places in the world because our labor cost is so high. Our approach always has to be, how can we do something with the minimal application of labor and usually the most mechanization as possible.
Right.
So where it's possible, where the terrain allows, we're going to drive tractors or equipment through the fields, and we're going to throw fertilizer from there. We're going to cut the grass from there on equipment, and farms are usually laid out to allow efficient use of equipment on the farms. But how frequently people fertilize or how frequently people do things to manage coffee berry borer depends a lot farm to farm and the resources they have or are willing to allocate to take care of that. But absolutely, I strongly believe that healthier trees produce better tasting coffee. You get better yields, stronger plants, and better tasting coffee. Those things I don't believe are mutually exclusive.
Can they get help from engineers, in agronomics, or is there something?
We have extension agents with the university here. There are lots of resources available, but at the end of the day, those things cost money, and you either have it or don't, or you are willing to spend it or you're not. So that's with farms everywhere around the world. Coffee is also a kind of seasonal crop. You tend to get most of your money all at once, and then you don't have much money for quite a while.
Right.
So, most farmers, I think they know what they should be doing, but they don't always have the resources or available labor to do what they need to do when they need to do it.
Yeah. So what happens after harvest? Do all the different farms have the facilities to process the cherries, or do they have like communal facilities?
It varies on the region. In Kona, the vast majority of the farms sell coffee cherries to larger mills that buy. There are several estates that process their own. In other parts of the island where there isn't as large of a kind of centralized industry, farmers tend to process themselves on a smaller scale.
Okay. And generally, it's do we find the different processes, or is it generally washed?
It's 99% washed. There is some other processes going on, and only a handful of people actually executing them well. Doing a natural or a honey is very, very risky. If you don't do it well, you have coffee that becomes basically unsellable. But there are in the recent 2 to 3 years some more farmers that are doing those styles and executing them very, very well. But we're talking, probably less than a dozen on the island that I'm aware of at this time.
Okay. And how about yourself? Do you work on wash coffee, or have you tried other stuff?
I've tried everything and probably more than you can think of.
How out of all of these, like, how would you? What is the percentage of coffee that you would actually sell?
The stuff that I process myself right now from farms that I source cherry from is about 50% wash, 50% natural right now. Everything I do these days is inoculated with wine yeast, various strains in the fermentation stage. I'm not doing any, natural fermentations anymore.
Interesting. So when did you switch, and why did you switch?
Hundreds and hundreds of cupping experiments.
Mhm.
That's the why. I've tasted about 500 samples in the last year and a half or so. I'm tasting 8 today, and probably 8 to 10 next week. And every single week, I do another round of experiments somewhere, as much as possible, or taste other people's experiments.
So copying is again the centerpiece of
Yeah,
your
it's,
decisions.
it's a guideline for about a year. You know, there would always be a non-inoculated control for these, but for the most part, don't even bother with it anymore because every single time the yeast ferments, especially with the better strains, they outperform it. So there's almost no point. It's kind of comparing is, I guess, a baseline for what we think is good results in the past, and use that as a starting point to evaluate any new strains or new methods or variations on what we would be doing.
All right, cool. Maybe we can go back a little and see like what are we talking here? Are we talking about yeast, and we're talking about post-harvest processes? But really, like, what are we talking about, and what happens at this stage?
Yeah, well, we are only still starting to learn what's actually happening at this stage. I mean, processing traditionally has really been done just as a tool for fruit removal to get it to a point where you can sell the product. Most of the real research into the biology of what's going on in fermentation is in the last decade, and a lot of it in the last 5 years. Research into actually, manipulating these fermentations through intentional inoculation of different microbiological species. We're talking last 5 years, mostly the last 2 to 3 years.
Hmm. So, how did you find the first strains to use and test?
It was the first ones that I tested were actually some friends in Thailand that were doing some experiments, and they literally just grabbed, a selection of stuff that was available in 5-gram packets on the internet of wine strains, and just tested them all out. And they tested them on 3 different sites and 3 different varieties. And we did find a couple that worked well. One of those I still use sometimes. Then, a couple of years later, the Lao Cafe product started coming on the market. So kind of tested those and compared those, and have been just trying dozens of strains since then from many manufacturers.
So practically, how does it happen? How do you put in the yeast in contact with the cherries?
I mean, first you have to rehydrate the yeast with warm water. Once the yeast is rehydrated, then you would just add it to some sort of fermentation vessel, usually in water, whether that's pulped or unpulped coffee. Then you would add it, and then you're going to ferment for some period of time.
So how do you decide how much time?
Experiment and experiment and experiment.
Do you measure some stuff like the amount of sugar or acidity?
Sometimes I will take the starting bricks and the finishing bricks and kind of see how those compare, looking at the pH. But in traditional fermentation, I think that pH gives you kind of more of a guideline. You can get significantly below the numbers that people would be comfortable with inoculated fermentations without getting any sort of off tastes. So I think if everything you were doing is exactly the same every time, the same size vessel at the same size temperature with the same amount of cherry every single time, those metrics might be useful. But if you are varying those things, like you probably are in most commercial environments, then there's too much variability that could happen, to those numbers to really be completely useful.
So what amount of cherries do you use for experiments? Because like if it's an experiment, so I suppose it has to be on small amounts, or else you would risk to lose a lot of coffee.
Yeah, usually on the small end, about 2 kilos of cherry. If I'm doing methods that I already feel pretty comfortable with and I have worked well at a smaller scale, it might be up to 100 kilos of cherry. This season, some of the methods that I found worked well last season. I'll be trying to scale up larger than that, maybe as much as 400 or 500 kilos of cherry at a time.
Mm. And so, like, I'm curious, like when you sell this coffee, like, is it a marketing point for you? Like, are you
Yeah,
transparent about how you? Yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. It is a marketing point. We mentioned that it's a yeast fermentation in these coffees. Specific details of that I don't disclose at this time, but yeah, it is absolutely a marketing point.
And I suppose also that's why some people like across the world come to you and ask for your mastery of the yeast inoculation. Is that what you do? For example, you were talking about Thailand, but that's where it all started. But do you continue these experiments with yeast inoculation in Thailand, for example, or in other countries?
I wasn't able to go there myself this season, but they did do a 60-kilo bag lot for me using a process that I recommended them to do. When I was there last year, then we cupped several experiments that several growers had done with variations on yeast and carbonic macerations and anaerobic fermentations. We cupped a lot of things.
In your experience, the quality is always improved when you are able to control and use the right strain for the right varietal. And is there an effect on the way the coffee lasts in a there's been talk about like carbonic maceration. The quality of the coffee is at the maximum in the first months, but then it decreases very fast. Have you experienced anything like this, for example?
I have not seen a drop off in quality. I've seen usually the coffees improve with age.
Really? Okay. Yeah.
Now, I mean, with extended fermentations, there is possibility that there is basically cell death, and then that might be kind of why the coffees have a short period of time that they last well. Could also be drying problems, other things that could be contributing to that. I haven't heard that or haven't experienced it yet, but I haven't tasted that many carbonic maceration coffees myself.
Okay. Are you trying to actually, so you said like you yeast and then you inoculate the amount of cherries that you have, but do you have to control the population of microbes that are already present? Are you trying to kill everything before?
No, not doing anything to kill everything. You're not getting complete dominance, but for the most part, you're getting dominance, and pretty quickly you're producing a lot of alcohol and reducing the pH. So you are limiting the what can thrive in that environment. So it's not going to be completely that it's only yeast that are acting, but you are going to severely limit other things from being there.
And that's really the way you should be doing. Try to control everything.
I mean, honestly, we don't know yet at this stage. If it's ideal to have on only yeast fermentation or on only lactic bacteria fermentation. There could be interactions between the different species that yield better results than having something that was only one thing. There's not enough research yet to say one way or the other.
Has someone actually tried to use a small dose of antibiotics first and then inoculate?
Yeah, I've heard of some people doing that. There are I haven't really heard of any runaway success stories as a result of that so far. And I haven't seen any research, which is mostly getting done in Brazil, to that effect either.
So now you have a certain number of strains that you use, and you say that they are already like commercial offers. Are they actually specific coffee specific strains, or are they all come from the wine industry or the beer industry?
They're mostly from the wine industry. I'm not using the coffee specific strains, which are being produced by La Cafe right now.
That's the only company that exists.
That's the only company. There's only 3 or 4 products that they have out so far, and that's the only company.
Okay, but So how do you, for those who don't know, like how do you keep your strains? Is that easy to keep your strain for the next year?
I'm always purchasing more.
Oh, okay. You don't keep them in the lab or something.
No. I'm
Yeah.
purchasing 1 kilo bricks of yeast at a time.
Okay. All right. Okay. So it's easy for anybody then to try to experiment. Like if you want to try this, you can. It's easy, but then you have to understand what you do if you don't want to lose the coffee you experiment on.
Yeah, I would say there's fairly low risk of having a poor quality coffee. There is a risk of wasting money if you if you make a mistake. Either you use too much or the product died, and because you didn't take care of it very well, then you have basically the same as not using any yeast, and you spent a lot of money to do it. But other than that, I think it's fairly low risk, less risky than doing naturals and honeys without really knowing what you're doing.
Hmm. So so you seem like very positive about the quality improvement using the yeast. And I suppose when you talk about it, there are people who really want to go with you, and there are some people who are very that are more critical about it. Maybe because they don't believe in it, or maybe they think that it's artificial. Just the same talk that we have in wine, really, like natural wine versus chemical wine. Like, how do you respond to that?
There's plenty of places you can get natural produced products right now. So if you are against it, then fine. You don't have to purchase it. I think we're almost every other beverage industry is using very controlled fermentations. I would imagine that even in pickled, commercial produced pickled products, you're using commercialized strains in a very controlled environment, not leaving things to chance. I've just recently tasted some natural wines for the first time, and they do remind me a lot of kind of natural coffees. That you get some interesting flavors there, but there's some funk there that I wouldn't consider desirable.
Hmm.
And if you are having a more controlled process, you can eliminate that. Maybe you kind of take the highs down a little bit here, so there's a little less intensity, but you eliminate the off taste. And I think particularly with controlling the fermentation environment and controlling the biology, that you can have more consistent results potentially, and with less risk of introducing off taste to the product.
Hmm. I mean, in a certain way, the coffee industry has been really late on the on this side, and using strains and try to control very well the environment for the post harvest processes. Do you going to increase as well, and that coffee will mainly be yeast controlled process products in a few years?
Not in the near future. I don't think so. Um, I mean, most of coffee is still commercial coffee, where if you're selling it for $1 a pound, spending an extra 10, 20 cents a pound is probably, you're not going to see the benefit off of it. Um, you know, the, the application for this is probably the specialty industry, and it's the higher end of the specialty industry. When we talk about specialty coffee, that's 10 to 15% of the market, but most of that market is Starbucks and large chains like that. It's not what specialty coffee people think of as a specialty market. That's probably 1% or less of the global consumption. So that's probably in the short term what your market size is, just because of the kind of cost constraints of using it.
But you don't think that, like, if you want high volume of rather good quality, having a controlled way to process is desirable, even if it costs a little bit more. And maybe the costs are going to decrease because it's going to be like a more common way to do things.
Yeah, I think it depends on being able to get those costs to decrease to the point where they are comparable with existing technologies. If there are and this would probably be kind of against, or not in, I guess, not in favor of the people actually producing the product. The way that it might get cheaper is if people are able to grow their own, replicate their own strains on site. But then that's not really good for the people that are selling this product. They want you to buy, new product that they're selling you. But so if you're able to continually grow your own strains on the farm site, then you drop the cost down significantly.
Yeah, I wouldn't see why it's not doable. I suppose that's why I asked the question whether you were actually
I think it's more
maintaining.
an economics thing than anything. Is if the benefit um, is worth the cost. Right now, I mean, you can make pretty good, consistent coffee with existing technologies, demuselagers and mechanical dryers and cherry sorters, and there's a lot of and using improved varieties that are coming out, new F1 hybrids that are going to have a higher cup quality at anywhere. And if I was a very, very large operation, I would think that all those things would probably be cheaper in the long run than investing in fermentation manipulations like that. But I could be wrong.
So, what happens if someone from a country that you don't really know or you haven't been coffee producing country calls you and says like, "I need your help. I wanna know how to improve my coffee." How does that happen? Like, how do you do that part of your job?
It it depends on if it's somewhere that I'm interested to go more than anything at this point. I've been to a lot of countries. I'm mostly just traveling now to the places that I already have relationships. I don't go a lot of new places now, and I do it as a consulting project. So if they're offering me something that compensates my time enough to worth making that trip to do, but I have done a lot of that kind of stuff all over the world, going to different countries and to China, Thailand, Ecuador, Jamaica, to do that kind of work over the last decade.
So what is your favorite project? I mean, not to say that the other ones are bad projects, but maybe you have something that is more exciting.
I have lots of things that are exciting or that I'm excited about. I mean, I'm mostly working with Thailand and in Ecuador these days. I went last year to Malaysian Borneo, to Sabah province, which is the only Arabica growing region there that even people in Malaysia a year ago didn't realize was growing coffee. And there's, I think, a lot of potential there. And it's rapidly, since I've been there, the local industry is supporting it. And I really hope I can kind of get out there and, work with them to grow that as a new region as much as I can.
So how does that go? Like you have to cut everything that they do and see on site that you
Yeah, I mean, I went there last year,
okay.
or a year ago, just to kind of see and taste. I bought some of the coffee, and yeah, there's potential. Then the next thing is just figuring out what processes can be employed that people could do that are going to yield good results with very little risk. The guy that I went and visited, he's actually he sold his coffee shop and is focusing on building a mill and buying cherry and on the green side now. So he's going to build a kind of centralized cherry buying area, and that will make things a lot easier to work with on the processing to figure out what's best for those coffees.
Cool. And I suppose you are, so it's in Indonesia, so there's Arabica, but there's probably also Robusta, because I think you have a particular interest in things that people don't generally do. So that may also include different species than Arabica.
Yeah, so they also grew Robusta and Liberica in Malaysia.
And Liberica,
on the same island. Yeah.
And can you explain a little bit like how you got this interest with the different species and why you are interested with anything else than Arabica, which is the specialty coffee people?
I've always just kept an open mind. And I mean, again, I learned coffee, from what books were available 20, 25 years ago. And at least from reading, a lot of in learning espresso, a lot of traditional Italian roasters were using Robusta or felt that was key to part of the espresso profile. So I was always open to using it in espresso. My first espresso blend included Indian wash Robusta. So I've always been in favor and a supporter of that. And then naturally others, there's just a curiosity. What do other species taste like? What other varieties taste like? And I mean, my background, what I do is trying to figure out how to make coffees taste better, how to fix post-harvesting problems, how to work with origins that maybe don't have a reputation for quality or people that are bad. And they're not bad. They just are limitations on how they're being handled currently. So I take the same approach for other species. Is I don't think they're inherently bad. I just think we need to figure out how to best approach them, and it takes different methods, different handling than what we do for Arabica.
Mm. So generally, you would say that the Robusta is not or good enough to give the full potential of it.
Yeah, I mean, if you see your average Robusta farm compared to an average Arabica, you'd be shocked. I mean, you go a lot of these areas and they don't even pick it ripe. They'll just strip pick it green. As soon as the cherries are ripe enough that they have a seed inside, they will strip them off and they will just lay them on the ground, like in a pile this thick, molding and rotting for a month until the coffee is dried and they can sell it. And a lot of times the only buyer in an area is a very large instant coffee factory. There really is no, quality incentive. So it's just, how can I get this turned around as fast as possible to sell it? You do the same thing with the Arabica. Trust me, that's going to be very close to undrinkable. It's absolutely awful. Really, really bad. And most people in specialty don't get to taste bad Arabica. They, not the truly awful stuff where, it's unripe picked, it's rotten fermented naturals with a high defect count, and that's, I mean, honestly, it's more intense and in some ways I think worse than the commercial Robustas.
Right. Yeah. But what is the potential of Robusta? And actually, is Robusta just a varietal of Canephora? Are there other varietals?
So yeah, I mean, we commonly call it Robusta, but it is a variety or a subspecies of Canephora.
Have you come across other subspecies or varieties of Canephora?
Yeah. I mean, actually, a lot of the coffee that we call Robusta is not actually the Robusta subvariety. I believe that it actually is the Quilo or the Conilon that they grow in Brazil. But a lot of other regions in the world, they don't actually grow that. We call it Robusta, but yeah, Cafea Canephora is actually much more accurate because they aren't Robusta.
Mm-hmm. What is what has you've tested so far?
It gets a lot more complicated with Robusta and other species because they're cross-pollinating species. So they tend to be, they're genetic groups of them, but they're, every plant is very genetically different, or it's crossing with a lot of other plants. So unless you're doing clonal plants, then, it's not just like one variety like is common in
right. But from a specific location, or like, and do you know? Can you explain from what you kept why it's been better than the other Robustas that you tested?
Well, I mean, just because of the process. The better ones I tasted, a lot of it just comes down to handling. Ripe cherry versus not ripe cherry. The riper cherry tastes better. I think there are probably some selections and varieties that do cut better, and there does seem to be the same kind of relationship with altitude and quality with Robusta that there is in Arabica, that a lot of the better ones that I've tasted have been also higher elevation ones, sometimes 600, 700. I've even tasted some as high as 1,000 meters that, they had better qualities.
So Regine, who is a viewer, is asking in the chat if you came across Nganda.
Nganda, I've heard that name before, but I'm not too.
Is that so? You already talked about it, Regine, in a previous one, but it's delicious. She says, "Well, you have to put that on your list." Can you just say whether you find it in which country already, Regine?
Which country for what?
No, I'm asking Regine where you can find that particular coffee.
Is that from Uganda?
It might be Uganda. Yes, correct.
I've heard the name before. Yeah.
And I have to say that I tasted one time from Indonesia, and I don't remember the name of the variety that was written on the bag, but it had letters and numbers, so that's something that I could remember very easily. But it was amazing. It was so different from anything I tasted, or other Robustas or such. Yeah, I mean, I'm a strong believer.
there's a lot of different strains, and I don't think we have any clue what the plant potential is, since we do varietal selection for cup quality now in Arabica, and even that's fairly recent. But there's basically almost no exploration of that in Robusta, and because Robusta and other coffee species are cross-pollinating species, there's a lot more genetic diversity in them. So there could be potential for a lot, greater range of flavor profiles than exists in Arabica. There may not be, but that potential certainly seems more likely. That there probably are some elite strains that we could find if we're actually searching for them.
Are you going to go for the lookout and try to find them? Is that a mission of yours?
No, but one thing that I am working towards is planting some Robusta here in Hawaii and bringing in different material from different countries to try, so that I can taste these in one environment, and see what variation exists there, or what ones might have better cup quality. I've spent a lot of time with Ecuador Robusta judging the Taza Dorada the last 4 years, and there definitely are a couple strains down there that seem to consistently be among the winners there. One of them called locally developed, that I'm trying to remember the name, Napa Payomino.
Okay.
That is, seems to pretty consistently be, half of the top 10 coffees will be that variety. So I think there's probably something there.
Yeah, very cool. And how about the other species? Do you have ideas for also planting some of the other species that are available and that are drinkable?
Yes. So I'm currently roasting through my company a Liberica de Webre species from Costa Rica. That's carbonic maceration that actually tastes pretty great. If you like natural processed coffees, most consumers would probably not know right off the bat that it's not just a really good natural processed Arabica. And that happens to be the same species that we use in Hawaii, especially in Kona, as rootstock for root knot nematodes. So we have a lot of it, just kind of trees here and there, that I do plan to try and grow some of that and work with a little bit more.
Very cool. So what are you excited about in the next few years, and what are your missions, really?
Still working more with variations on fermentation, with looking at controlling the process more with temperatures, with looking at other organisms like lactic acid bacteria that might be used. There's some recent papers out of Brazil that suggest that there's very large quality improvements with selected strains of Lactobacillus plantarum. So those are things that I'd like to explore, and then varieties. I'm very big on exploring coffee varieties and species, and I've tested about a dozen so far here in Hawaii, but there's a lot of material that we haven't tested, or newer developed hybrids that I would love to test in this environment.
So more experiments. And actually, are you actually in touch with the different scientists that publish these papers, because they might be interested in your results and your experiments?
No, I haven't talked to anyone. I just I read what I can, but I haven't conversed.
Do you think it's a valuable thing to try to put in place, like having more communication between scientists and people on the field?
Probably. Usually the studies are tiny amounts of coffee in a pretty limited environment, and you don't always know if that is really transferable to real world applications. So yeah, if you have people doing something similar on the field level and a dozen different places, then it probably gives you some indication of what directions to go if more people are doing things in parallel.
Is there, because it's true that we talked about yeast a lot, but not really the bacteria. Is there do you handle them very differently from the yeast, and can you use both at the same time?
You probably can use both at the same time. Bacteria seems a little bit more difficult to handle, at least for commercial strains, kind of very temperature sensitive. So it would be quite expensive to transport. Then the other options would be that you've got to cultivate it from a local environment, and you'd probably need a biologist to help with that and to grow it and isolate it. But those things are feasible, and I know people that are working on it in the field. right now.
Okay.
And I'll get to taste the results of some of that probably in 4 or 5 months.
Nice. Okay. I'd be curious to taste that as well one day. So just to add something about Uganda, Regine asked if you checked your UCDA, which is the Uganda Coffee Directorate, and she mentioned that they can help with a fine cup Robusta. So that might be like another way to, and they also conduct research on wild Liberica. So there are obviously other people across the globe that work on different species.
Yeah.
And Nasco asked, aren't you afraid that together with good microorganisms, there could be a risk of growing some of the dangerous ones, like mycotoxins?
With coffee, not too concerned with that. I mean, mycotoxins are likely to come from molds, and that's not likely to be to happen in the fermentation stage itself.
If you control it,
yeah. I mean, and also we roast coffee. You know, we dry it to very low moisture content so that molds can't be active. That's one of the reasons that we dry coffee to 10-12%. You get about 14%, and then molds can be a concern. And then we roast it at 200 C for a long period of time. So as a concern to the consumer, it's pretty low. Now, as a concern to me or other people handling it, then yeah, maybe there could be.
There you go. Thanks. It's been a little bit more than an hour. There was a lot of content and things to discuss. I hope people who could listen to this conversation got a lot out of it. It went all over the place, but it's also what your day is like, apparently. So it's you touch a lot of different aspects of coffee, and quality improvement is attached to all of these different aspects. But really, what I gather again is that cupping and sensory skills is in the middle of this, and it's important to train if you want to improve quality.
That's what has to guide all the decisions. There aren't really any just numbers you can look at and say, okay, this is good or this is bad result. You have to, and there is some subjectivity to that as well. What I want to highlight out of my coffees may not be what you want to highlight. Yes. I think that's where we need to do a better job of communication in the coffee industry. We always want to say something is better, but how is it better? It's better in this attribute or that attribute, or increases this smell or aroma, rather than just saying it's better, saying that compared to other things, this has more acidity or this has more of an orange flavor or something to that aspect. Because there's almost nothing that is truly an improvement across the board.
Very well. On that note, we will finish. I thank you again for your time, and I'm really glad we could make this happen, and it worked really well. So thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Yeah, have a good day too. Bye, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.